JudgeCast. This is episode 11 of our much lauded series of YouTube videos focusing on how to become a level 1 judge. My name is Bryan Charles, and I am joined this evening, afternoon, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Feather.
Hello, hello.
And the one and only Marco Sanchez.
Hello, everybody. Let's start by giving a shout out to our sponsor. This episode and the entire series focusing on L1 improvement and essentials is sponsored by Judge Foundry. Judge Foundry is a membership-based nonprofit organization serving the US and Canada in providing certifications for tabletop gaming officials. They manage everything to do with obtaining and maintaining your certification and provide educational resources like this one to ensure that every Judge Foundry certified judge has the knowledge and skills to be successful. When it comes to running Magic events at your local game store or at a larger international convention, Judge Foundry is a great resource for you to certify your skills. For more information on Judge Foundry, visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to find out how you can earn your level. The link is in the description below. So how are we going to resolve this one?
Well, in previous episodes, we've talked about casting spells and putting triggers on the stack. In this episode, we will discuss resolving those spells, triggers, and activated abilities. We will continue our focus on what a level 1 judge working F&M or scheduled events at a larger event should know. As always, not every corner is explored in depth, but if you wish to go deeper or explore topics faster than these videos come out, you can delve into our extensive library at judgecast.com or search for us in your podcast app of choice. Our podcasts are typically at least an hour, so you get both more detailed discussion, humor, insight, and of course, our saccharine declamations.
So, as we said in the timing and priority episode, each time all players pass in succession, the topmost spell or ability on the stack resolves. So what does that mean? Typically, you think it means just do what the spell or ability says, but as you figured out from the other 10 episodes, sometimes it's a bit more complex than that. As with many things in Magic, resolving spells and abilities, they're broken up into types, and then there's a variety of steps for those types. So first we're going to talk about instant and sorcery spells and then abilities. Then we're going to talk about permanent spells resolving, as that's handled a little differently. So when a sorcery or instant spell resolves, or an ability goes to resolve, we do a couple of checks, and then if those checks pass, we continue resolving that spell or ability.
If the object resolving is a triggered ability with an intervening if clause, we check to see if that clause is still true. If it's not true, the ability is removed from the stack. It is not countered, it's just removed by the rules of the game. For example, Agent of Treachery's second trigger has an intervening if clause. You have to control 3 or more permanents you don't own, both for the trigger to go onto the stack, and it has to be true when the trigger goes to resolve.
The next thing we check is if the spell or ability specifies any targets. Are the targets still legal? Think of it as making a list of all the targets the spell or ability checks, and then run down a checklist. Is the target no longer in the zone it was in when it was targeted? If an object changes zones, it's treated as a new object. If it's blinked or flickered and returns, treating as a new object means the spell or ability loses track of it across the zone changes. Have changes to the game state cause the target to no longer be legal? This one requires a bit more of a breakdown. Is the targeting requirement still valid is the first question you want to ask yourself. This can take many forms. If the spell says destroy target non-black creature, the targeted object has to still be a non-black creature to be a legal target. If it became a black creature, or just became an artifact somehow, it's no longer a legal target. Or, gaining Shroud and Hexproof can also make something an illegal target.
If you ran through the checklist for all the targets, and all the targets are illegal, then the spell or ability won't resolve and it's just removed from the stack. If only some of the targets are illegal, the spell or ability will still resolve. The illegal targets just won't be affected by any of the resolving spell's effects that impact them. It is possible for a card to be targeted 2 different ways from one effect, like a land creature being targeted by a spell that destroys both target land and target creature. If you are somehow able to make it an illegal target for the creature portion, but it's still valid for the land portion, it's still going to get destroyed.
Now we get to a fun part, actually resolving the ability. The controller of the spell or ability follows the instructions in the order written on that spell or ability. With modal cards, like for example Dromoka's command, if you choose the third and fourth modes, you will always put the +1/+1 counter on target creature first, and then the target creature you control will fight another target creature you don't control. Or, with Batterskull here, the living weapon triggered ability will have the 0/0 germ creature token enter the battlefield first, then the equipment is attached to it, all part of resolving that ability. Sometimes, though, you need to look ahead to the next sentence to see if it impacts the sentence you are currently on, because the next sentence can modify the meaning of the earlier one. Counter target spell ultimately means remove the spell from the stack and put it in its owner's graveyard. However, some cards might say counter target spell if that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of into that player's graveyard, like on Remand here. In this case, if you follow the instructions in the exact order, you would get a really weird result. The rules even acknowledge this somewhat by saying, don't just apply effects step by step without thinking in these cases. Read the whole text and apply the rules of English to the text, which is their way of saying do everything in order except when it just doesn't make sense to do so.
That quote is literally from the CR.
Is it really?
Yes. 100%.
Excellent.
They just kind of give up and be like,
you get it.
You figure it out.
Common sense rules. Okay, let's talk about some other rules, like little one-off rules. While following the instruction, a spell or ability may require choices. These choices are the leftovers of choices not made as part of casting the spell or putting the ability on the stack. Things like choose a color or sacrifice a creature. Those are decided on resolution. The color and the creature are not chosen when the spell is cast. So for example, we have Brave the Elements, which tells us to choose a color, and white creatures you control gain protection from the chosen color until end of turn. You don't actually choose the color while Brave the Elements is on the stack, you choose it when it resolves. With Angrith's Rampage, you choose the target player, so you'll choose the target player that sacrifices an artifact, or they sacrifice a creature, or they sacrifice a planeswalker. When the spell resolves, they choose which artifact, or they choose which creature, or they choose which planeswalker, whichever mode you chose for the resolution of the spell. However, you can't make an impossible choice. For example, if an opponent's life total cannot change due to a Platinum Imperium, you cannot choose for them to lose life with a choice of damnations.
Some spells and abilities have multiple steps or actions that involve multiple players. In these cases, the choices for the first action are made in app-nap order, and then we process that action simultaneously. Then we do that for the second action the same way, and so on. So for a card like Balance, which says each player chooses a number of lands he or she controls, equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, a lot of words, then sacrifices them. Players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. This is basically saying we're going to choose the lands that we sacrifice in app-nap order, then we sacrifice all at once. Then we choose the cards that we're going to discard in app-nap order, and then we discard all at once. Then we choose what creatures we're going to sacrifice in app-nap order, and we sacrifice all at once. A less complicated example would be the -4 ability of Liliana Dreadhorde General, which says each player sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. That's simply going to be, we choose in app-nap order, meaning later players get to know what's been chosen to sacrifice, and then the sacrifice happens all at once.
If an effect gives a player the option to pay mana, they can activate mana abilities before taking that action. If an effect gives a player the ability to cast a spell during the resolution of that effect, they follow all the steps from our Steps to Cast a Spell episode, and the spell becomes the topmost object on the stack before we go back and finish resolving this spell or ability. If an effect requires information from the game, that answer is determined only once on resolution. So looking at Ashcoat of the Shadow Swarm, the value of X for Ashcoat's ability is determined once when it resolves. It looks for the number of other rats you control, and that is the value of X. It does not later change if the number of rats you control changes. Sometimes, the effect requires information from a specific object. If that object is in the expected public zone, then we can use its current information. If it's no longer in the expected public zone, because maybe the source was destroyed, we use the object's last known information.
So here's an example. All right. Let's say I have somehow enchanted my Prodigal Sorcerer with lifelink, and I tap and ping Marcos for 1 damage. While that ability is on the stack, Marcos kills my Prodigal Sorcerer. All right. It's going to deal that 1 damage to Marcos. But that effect, that dealing damage, is going to look back, and it needs information about the source. It needs information about that Prodigal Sorcerer. That Prodigal Sorcerer is not on the battlefield. So it's going to look back, and if it needs to know the color for some reason, it's going to look back and see that the Prodigal Sorcerer was blue. If it needs to know something about the mana value of the permanent, it's going to look back and see 2 and a blue. If it needs to know if the source had lifelink, which in this case it did, it's going to look back and see that it had lifelink. Last note information. And I use Prodigal Sorcerer because I'm old. Deal with it.
After everything on the card has been done, we need to finish up. If the object resolving is an instant or sorcery spell, we put it in the graveyard. If the object is some ability, the ability is removed from the stack and ceases to exist. If it's a permanent spell that's resolving, we still have a little bit more work to do. For permanent spells, we first check to see if the permanent spell has any targets. If it has no targets, it enters the battlefield under the control of that spell's controller. If it does have targets, we check to see if the targets are still legal, the same way we did for instant sorcery spells and abilities previously. If the target is illegal, the spell doesn't resolve and is put in the owner's graveyard instead. Yeah, bestow, mutate, change this, but this is an L1 episode and we don't need to go into those at this time.
True story.
If the object that's resolving was a copy of a permanent spell, it becomes a token permanent as it's put onto the battlefield, as it resolves. However, even though it's become a token permanent, it wasn't created for the purposes of rules or effects that care about creating tokens. Permanents entering the battlefield can also have static effects that modify how they enter the battlefield, like Clone's copy effect. This isn't technically a function of the clone spell resolving, but rather a replacement effect that modifies how it enters the battlefield. This makes some kind of sense if you think about it, because Clone's copy effect happens regardless of how it's put on the battlefield, not as a function of it being cast.
Lastly, some of these permanent spells will have static abilities that function on the stack, but create delayed triggered abilities as that permanent is put onto the battlefield. Think of the mechanics Dash and Blitz, for example. And once you're done with that, that's it. Everything is resolved. State-based actions are checked, triggers get put on the stack, and players get priority all over again. And that's all we got for today's episode. Once again, we'd like to thank Judge Foundry for their support in sponsoring this series, for helping you earn your Level 1 certification. Please make sure to visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to learn how you can join the Magic judging community in the US and Canada and earn your certification with Judge Foundry.
Join us next time as we continue our series for earning your Level 1 certification and start talking about everyone's, including ours, Boogeyman layers. If you want to reach out to us, we have our own Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. The invite link to our Discord server is in the description below, as well as our JudgeCast and individual social media links. If you're a fan of our content, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and ring that bell to be notified of when new videos in this series are posted or when a new episode of our full podcast is released. Make sure to check out our channel's playlists for a complete L1 series, as well as a Learn to Judge playlist with episodes from JudgeCast's history focused on helping you become a better judge. And as always, you can find everything relating to JudgeCast at judgecast.com. With that, I'm Charles Feather, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
I'm Brian Perlman, and I don't just apply these step by step without thinking.